Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone's surviving day 2 of Slush. I see people a little more tired today than yesterday, but I know exactly why, because I saw a lot of people wandering around the streets of Helsinki last night. I am Sahir from Index Ventures. I'm excited to have a conversation with my friend Maxim Fateev, one of the most impressive technical founders in our portfolio, about an amazing company he's been building for the last few years called Temporal. If you think about all the software we use today in our daily lives, when we book a car or a taxi, to processing a payment or looking up a health record, behind the scenes there's a lot of complexity that goes into making those magical experiences work. And keeping those resilient and working is a really hard problem. And that's a core of the mission of Temporal. And so, Max, I'd love to get into sort of what is Temporal for the broader audience, and how did you get to solving this problem?
If you kind of look at the software these days, and a lot of you build software, is that probably most of the code you write has nothing to do with your business logic. Probably sometimes 80% of your code is not your business logic. It's about reliability, it's about scale, it's about durability, and linking all these pieces together. And I think it's wrong. It's just that we want you to focus on differentiated logic, on what makes your company, your startup successful. And what Temporal does, it's an open source project, and it's built on this idea, which what we call durable execution. And it allows to move most of the complexity of the distributed systems into the platform layer, which means that you as a developer write 80% of your code, it becomes business logic. And that's why you become much more productive. And as platform being open source, it allows you a lot of flexibility.
So as investors, we like to talk about this idea of founder market fit. I think you are an amazing example of that, because you've been building complex, resilient systems basically for your whole career. So maybe tell us a little bit about your own personal story, your own professional background, and how you got to kind of building a company in this space.
So personally, I grew up in Russia, Soviet Union, and I left at 95 and ended up in Brazil. So I have physics degree from Russia and computer science degree from Brazil, from Rio de Janeiro. And ended up in America in 98, worked in a couple of startups, and then ended up at Amazon. And Amazon, I spent 8.5 years. And I was in the middle of this transformation. Amazon was one of the first companies which went from like huge monolith to microservices. And people ask, why would you break monolith into microservices? Imagine at Amazon, just relinking that binary was taking 45 minutes. Imagine you make a change as a developer and wait 45 minutes to be able to test it. And the whole development cycle becomes pretty weird. So Microsoft had to break it into pieces. And then I was tech lead for the platform which is responsible for PubSub, for like messaging, or asynchronous communication of all those services. Later, the engine I wrote became backend for Simple Queue service. And as a tech lead for PubSub, I was kind of responsible for overseeing a lot of applications. And it became pretty clear that event-driven systems just wrong approach to build microservices at scale. So we started to think how to solve that. And at the end, we had multiple iterations. One of them ended up being called Simple Workflow Service, AWS Simple Workflow. And I was tech lead for that. Later, co-founder of Temporal, Summer, who worked with me on a simple workflow, went to Microsoft to build durable task frameworks. Now Microsoft has Azure Durable Functions. And then we ended up at Uber. And we built, kind of took the idea, all these ideas, and created an open source project called Cadence. And it became successful within Uber. So we had over 100 applications running on that within 3 years. And then later we started a company.
So I think it's a bit of a unique story in terms of how you even decided to start a company. I know Cadence went open source at Uber, and then why don't you give us a little bit of the color of that experience of the investment community and Hacker News and the virality that happened because of that technology?
So neither me or co-founder of Temporal, we actually had no clue about startup ecosystem. We weren't startup people. We were just engineers, 2 engineers building technical solutions. And we never discussed even starting the company while building that project. But we built it as an open source because we believed that it was very widely applicable. And what happened is that first 2 years it was crickets. Nobody cared about our open source project. And it was out there on GitHub. We built it from open source from the beginning. But later we saw companies, but we run it in production at high scale at Uber. And later companies like HashiCorp, Coinbase, Box, Airbnb started to approach us because they kind of saw value in the solution. And we started to get some external adoption. And one day, somebody from our community pinged us and said, you know that you are on top of Hacker News, the discussion of your service. And we had a pretty good discussion back then. And we started to get incoming calls from investors. And then we started to think, OK, maybe we should start a company around that.
Yeah, in many ways, you had product market fit and investor market fit before you even decided to launch the company itself.
That is certainly very good position to be in, because when people ask me, how do I pitch my startup, I'm like, I have no clue. Investors pitched me themselves.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. So one of the dynamics I know, having worked at an open source technology company myself for a long time, is there's a constant tension between how you support your community, what goes into the free version of the software, how do you think about the business model and monetization. I'd love to get a sense of how you've navigated that, you and Samara, as you've built Temporal over the last few years.
So because Temporal was kind of built based on ideas from AWS, because we kind of built the first version of that in AWS, it was pretty clear how to monetize that, because we have backend service, and then we have your application which you run. And we only monetize the backend service. So we can run that cluster for you. But that cluster you can run yourself. It's MIT licensed, so it's fully open source. And that type of software, it's kind of inherent part of your application. It makes your life much simpler, but it's 100% lock-in. It's pretty obvious. So having a real open source version of that, not crippled, but real fully functional version in the open source is very important. And that's why very large companies trust us with their kind of mission-critical flows, because they know that if a company does something wrong or goes wrong direction, they can always just take and start running open source themselves. So for us, it was kind of pretty clear that having fully functional open source MIT licensed software and not changing license is very, very important.
Yeah, it's almost like the entire system software ecosystem over the last 15 to 20 years has gotten open source, from the operating system to databases to durable execution to caches. Like every single layer has kind of been expected to now be open source, even if it is delivered as a cloud service.
I think infrastructure level software has to be open source. It just doesn't make sense to build any infrastructure level software is not open source. Because you either get a company, then nobody will trust you because they'll be scared of lock-in. And they have every big company we talk to has a lot of concerns about that, because they remember the past, and they had quite a few problems with that. And then if you are building some infrastructural software inside of your company, that project eventually will die. I worked at Amazon. In the beginning of 2000s, we built so much cool stuff. Very useful applications, but we didn't open source them. Most of them in 5-10 years became obsolete because kind of ecosystem caught up. So I do believe if you're building any infrastructural stuff, it should become open source or it will die eventually.
So having the unique perspective of both working at a hyperscaler, but now building a company that both collaborates and partners with the hyperscalers, but in some ways also competes with its services, how do you navigate that dynamic? I know there are a lot of other companies that are being built here that have similar concerns. Not only are the model companies potentially, if you're an AI company, going to compete with you, but also if you're a systems or software company, could the hyperscalers eat your lunch, even if they're a dependency? How do you navigate it?
So far, we know that at some point they can start running on open source. But one thing we found that Amazon was an amazing partner for us, that they clearly have they learned a lot. I think they're much more friendly right now to the community. I think what they did to Elastic is not something they want to repeat. And second is that we kind of build our proprietary part of our backend in a way that even if you take our open source, it would be very hard to compete with us directly.
Got it. So as one of the fastest growing companies in our portfolio, we talked a little bit about the inception. Give us a sense of the size, the scale, the use cases that Temporal is solving now in 2025.
So we have, I don't remember exact numbers, so over 2,000 clients, probably over 200 large enterprises running on us. Use cases, it's a very wide, like let me tell what a durable execution is because it's very abstract to all of you at this point. For those of you who are technical, who are non-technical, probably listen for a minute. Imagine that we preserve full state of code execution all the time. So you write function, it blocks on some API call, and then process crashes. Then 2 days later, reply to that function comes back. We will resurrect that process in exactly the same state. All local variables, everything is preserved. You're still blocked on the same API call, and then we give you result that continues. So from the engineer point of view, crash never happened. It just waited on an API call for 3 days. So imagine you can write code which is crashless. It cannot crash. So it means that you can write function which runs for a year, for example. And it completely changes the way you think about software because hard guarantee that your code will keep running in the presence of any failure. So if you think about it, it's not about any specific vertical. It's about how you build software in general, distributed systems, reliably. And it's applicable for almost anything. Infrastructure automation, for example, HashiCorp Cloud, Datadog backend, Netflix, they use it for orchestrating the infrastructure. Then you go like higher level, you do the data pipelines. Practically tons of AI these days, it's about preparing data. It's about moving data, creating that context. All this pipeline processing is very, very common scenario for Temporal. Then you go up and you do business processes, payments, banks. A lot of banks are doing payments. In India, people do UPI, like instant payments with us. Why would you do instant payment with our system? Because you need sagas, you need compensations. And then you go up the stack, you can do lifecycle management and so on. And now we do agents. Think about it. Agents become more complicated. They become kind of more ambient. They live for a long time. They call operations which can take a long time. MCP doesn't support long-running tools, right? So MCP cannot make tool which runs for 2 days. But with Temporal, you can just have a tool which runs for 2 days, and it's reliable. So if you're building agents and need to perform any business-level process, Temporal is a good fit.
Got it. So in many ways, behind a lot of the software and the experiences we have, Temporal is the plumbing kind of connecting that glue, which is kind of the amazing thing.
And AI companies started to use that. So Replit, OpenAI, every OpenAI image is generated using Temporal, for example, or Codex. Codex orchestrates all this kind of, is Temporal behind Codex, and like Ambient, a lot of other kind of companies use that.
So switching gears a little bit more on the kind of company building side of things, one of the things that I think is quite interesting about the journey of Temporal is you started obviously with your co-founder, Samar. Originally, you were the CEO. You decided with him a few years ago or a couple of years ago to swap roles. Can you give us a little bit of color of what drove that? How did you have trust as co-founders to swap those roles? How did it affect the organization?
Yeah, it's certainly, I'm super lucky that we kind of had 2 people who started the company, trust each other 100%. And me and Samar kind of worked on this project from the beginning as engineers. And we started the company, I was CEO. And when you start the company, it's mostly about product, right? Like it's just building out product, creating community, like open source certainly growing the community. And then as company grows and goes like beyond 100 people, starts getting real customers, CEO job completely changes, right? It's becoming practically about scaling the company, about go-to-market, about hiring executives. And I found that I just don't want to do that. I'm a technical guy. I like technology. I want to think about next kind of generation of the software. And I found that hiring next CFO, and it takes half a year to hire a CFO, sometimes 9 months. It's a process I don't want to, like, I'm not invested in that process. And my co-founder was actually good at that, and we kind of decided to switch places, so I became CTO. But I'm CTO with 0 reports, so I have the best job in the world now.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think a lot about is we see companies grow, or having built companies myself, is just the constant adaptability you need because the job changes every few years. And so it's really interesting to see not only as a person, but also as a company, that kind of adaptive way you guys managed that
absolutely.
switch and still kept the business ripping along the whole way. It's really special.
They're still not very large. We have 350 people, but obviously growing from 0 of like 2 people to 350, every half a year or every year, you're in very different company. Now I don't remember most of employees. I go into the room in just one group. And I'm like, okay, I don't know most of you anymore.
So now that you get to spend so much of your personal time thinking about the future of the technology, obviously there's a lot happening in our ecosystem right now. I mean, you've been working on the same domain, kind of solving this idea of building resilient systems for, I don't know, 15, 20 years at this point. What's top of mind for you now as you look forward for the next few years for Temporal and just in what you're seeing in the industry?
Beyond like usual things of growing the company, growing the service, we run very scaled infrastructure level service. Obviously, AI was top of the mind, and it's interesting just from a personal point of view. If you think about it, like this is a problem I've been working on 25 years, and the code base is 10 years old, and the company is 6 years old. And at some point, it's not like I've got bored, but certainly kind of at some point, like I'm doing the same thing because obviously I have more ideas how to do that, but still it takes time to execute on them. And at some point, I've got not bored, but at least I kind of felt that it's not as interesting as it was before. And then AI happened. Now I'm super excited because at this point, first time, the world really starts changing big time. Because think about it, as a company, we are targeting developers, right? Because every developer, if they don't know Temporal, don't know durable execution, they're missing out big time. Because they're reinventing the wheel all the time. At least they should know about it. And right now, what developers are doing is changing, and changing very significantly. So nobody knows what developer job will look like in 5, 10 years with AI. And for us, it's a big challenge, because if you have a company which developers love, it doesn't mean that it will be successful in 10 years when developers are completely different people or they do completely different job. So it's an amazing challenge, and certainly I'm excited to solve that.
Yeah, you were telling me a story backstage about your son and how he's building software in a completely different way than how you started in your career.
Yeah, my son he's 1 year out of college, and he started to work on some startup months ago, and he like, Dad, I wrote 50,000 lines of code in 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, did you vibe code something? No, it's a production level code with unit tests and everything. But yeah, Claude wrote like 70% of that. And he said he didn't believe in that thing. But practically when they started, the CTO of startup told him, you have to use like these tools. And he didn't want to do, and now he's fully converted because he believes that people who don't, like, it takes time to understand the tools. It's like as anything, and takes time to kind of use them properly. But he clearly sees that it's, if you do it right, it's 10x improvement. And I certainly, as CTO of a company which is not as moving as fast by now, I'm certainly concerned that we are not really embracing these tools in the way we should.
So on that point, Temporal, as you mentioned, the code base is 10 years old. The company's been growing rapidly since it started 6 years old, but it's kind of pre the generative AI boom. How do you think about navigating that? Do you view that as an opportunity for Temporal, a threat for Temporal? Is that in your control? What are the dynamics there?
So far, it was actually amazing for us because, again, as I said, that we are directly applicable to every agentic use case there or data pipeline use cases. And that's why we see our growth this year was insane. We started to grow like over 300%. And a lot of that is just that it takes time because we are practically new paradigm how you build software. So it's not like you tomorrow start realizing value. Like ChatGPT, you just log in and start typing there. Temporal, you need to learn it, you need to understand it. There is some kind of learning curve. But after 1-2 years, most companies go all in and start building a lot of that. So maybe it's some growth, it comes from just having a lot of companies on our platform for a while. But I think agentic stuff and all this AI stuff is certainly very important. And for us, it was amazing because we built something to solve distributed systems problem. And now one thing which people still don't realize, that all these AI applications are just distributed systems applications. It's just more moving parts. If you think about it, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and all what's happening is like we created more moving parts. So initially we had like desktop applications, then we started to do client server, then we invented virtual machines, then we've got containers, lambdas, now we have agents. But at the end, what it means is that instead of one thing, now you have hundreds of things, or thousands, or millions of things, and all we need to communicate and create value. And that is a challenge. And at the same time, the abstractions you use as a developer are still the same. In 90s and 80s, you had database, you had a handler of Okay, it was Corba back then, but you had handlers, services, and you had queues. And this is it. And you still have the same abstractions. And people tell you, build agents with queues and databases. And it's just wrong. And if you think about it, durable execution, this abstraction of code which cannot crash, is a new abstraction, application-level abstraction we introduced. And this allowed us kind of completely rethink how you do things. And it's very, very applicable in this new agentic world.
Yeah, I think one of the unique things working with Temporal is you're really creating a new approach to building software, and it's a category creation opportunity as a business. I'd love to get a sense of like what's made that challenging, or what has that been an advantage? How have you viewed that as you've thought about not just the building of the technology, but the marketing of it, the distribution, the go-to-market of the organization overall?
That is the main challenge, because one thing I always tell to my marketing people is that if I'm on conference floor, I grab a random person and say, do you want to know about Temporal? He's like, go away, right? Like, I don't talk to vendors. I'm able to convince him in 1 minute that he wants to listen to me. I usually say, it's open source, right? It's like, it solves this problem. And 5 minutes later, usually, I don't know how to get rid of that person. They're telling the story of their lives to me. And the same thing, usually most adoption of technology came from people changing companies. People at Uber used it a lot, they moved to other companies, and every time developer learns about it, it cannot unlearn it. So it kind of goes and brings it to another with them. At the same time, if I go to you and say, okay, do you want to use durable execution framework? Like, most people never heard about it. Yeah. This is a problem with a new category, because category doesn't mean anything. Yeah. It's like me coming in the 90s and say, do you want to do container orchestration? What it's all about, right? You need to explain the whole thing to somebody. Now we know what it is. The same thing, oh, I want to do AI agents. Imagine saying something like that 5 years ago. It wouldn't make any sense. So that's why about durable execution, the main challenge is awareness. It's about explaining to people, making sure that colleges teach that, because it's a new category. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a kind of awareness was it's still the largest challenge for us.
It's the largest challenge, yeah. So having transitioned from a leading engineer at some of the biggest technology companies, at brands we all know, to being a company builder, what are some of the key advice you would give, especially to technical founders as they think about evolving and becoming an entrepreneur for the first time?
I think just solve a real problem and be customer users obsessed. For us, for example, we still, I think our main asset we have is our community. It's our customers. Like as a business, having NDR over 200%, and we have pretty large base right now. Our revenue is pretty significant, and at the same time, we still have an NDR like net dollar retention of 200%. It means something, and we have a community, and community it's super positive, right? But it takes effort. It takes a lot of effort, and solving real problems for people. And I think that is something which we always try to do, and we will continue doing. And even things which don't scale, right? Because people say you cannot support open source community. You cannot answer every open source community question within minutes. Yeah. It doesn't scale. Our community is, I don't know, like 15,000 or maybe much more in Slack right now, and we still do that. And I think it's something we want to keep doing.
Yeah, the amount of goodwill that's been created by making sure that even open source users are taken care of, and you put a lot of intentionality into fostering that, I think is really a big part of the growth story here.
And the other part is that I think if you start the company, I think one thing I kind of learned is that if I knew how easy to start the company, at least in the US, I don't know here, but I would do it probably 15, 20 years ago, because I had a lot of ideas. It's just that I never thought it's so easy, especially when you get good investors. They are so supportive.
Awesome. Well, thank you for flying all the way from Seattle to Helsinki to tell the story of your background, what you're building at Temporal, and hopefully it was helpful, particularly for all the technical co-founders who are thinking about making that jump.
Yeah, so you can find me, just go temporal.io/Slack, and all is there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.